And these are magazines that could be laying around your house right now that could be worth thousands of dollars. Hey, it's Don. Today we're going to look at the top 20 most valuable magazines out there now. Now, these may be magazines you still have laying around the house. Many of these aren't that old. Let's have a look right now and show you what to be looking out for that can sell for some phenomenal money right this very minute. Now, obviously, I could not talk about magazines without discussing Playboy magazine's first issue. It's one that is still found out there in the wild, and here's a perfect example. This one sold for $7,500. Not graded, it's just a standardized copy you could find out there. Now, if you aren't familiar, this has Marilyn Monroe on the cover. This one is highly sought after and always sells for thousands of dollars. Now, that wasn't actually the first magazine cover that she appeared on. This one's from 1946, and this is Leader magazine. She was known at the time as Norma Jean, based on her actual name. This one is highly sought after. Most people miss this one, even if they run into it, because they don't realize it's Marilyn Monroe. It does not look like the typical Marilyn Monroe image that you will find, and this one always sells for thousands of dollars. She was on many different magazines, and most vintage magazines from the 40s, 50s, 60s with her on it will sell for something regardless. Now, this one surprises a lot of people, and this is Nintendo Power, the first edition of the magazine. Most of them had posters or something else inside. Now, this one is slabbed. It's graded. It's a 9.0 on basically a 10.0 scale. It sold with 56 bids for $11,000. Now, it doesn't have to be graded to still be worth a few $1,000s. Here's issue number 1 and 5, both complete. It's just a quick random listing of it, and these two issues still sold for over $2,000. So regardless, you're going to get at least $1,000 for a decent condition copy of Nintendo Power issue number 1. Now, right along that same line is Game Informer magazine. Most people wouldn't have a clue that this magazine would carry this kind of value as well. It's still being produced today. 5 bids over $700 on this issue with Sonic on the cover from 1991. Now, most first issues of most major magazines will carry some form of value. This is a 1954 Sports Illustrated first issue. Now, this is something you may have run into and not even realize it's tied to modern-day Sports Illustrated. It doesn't look the same. It's early. It's still a first edition. It still sells for thousands of dollars. This one's slabbed, 9.8, probably the highest graded version of this. Over $8,000 on this one. Now, again, it doesn't have to be graded to still carry thousands in value. Here is one that sold for $6,600, ungraded, as you see it here. Now, something to keep in mind on the first issue of this, it has, I believe, 26 or 27 inserted cards inside your sports cards. If they're there, it really adds to the value. If they're missing, it's incomplete and not worth anywhere near as much. Now, keep in mind, these were magazines that were just produced normally. They weren't limited editions. They weren't designed as collector's editions. They were started off in limited quantity, so there's not a ton of them available. Now, here's High Times magazine, issue number 1. It's got a foil cover on it. They only made about 1,000 of this edition, this printing here. Who knew if it was going to sell or not? This one is only a 4.5, a graded copy, which is about mid-grade, which is what you would expect to find in the wild right now, and it's still sold for over $2,000. Now, here's one I've talked about. We've sold many George magazines, including this exact copy, for well over $1,000 ourselves. And this is George Magazine's issue from February of '97. And this one talks about a potential pandemic and a bunch of other things going on. It's highly collected. This one was published by JFK Jr. Some copies of this a few years ago were selling close to $10,000 each. Now, here's a scarce one. This is Ebony Magazine, Volume 1, Number 1. This one doesn't show up very often. It's limited in production. This one has a crease. This was probably a mail-out in a mail-out sleeve. $1,500. And don't forget, the age is not always a factor when it comes down to the value of the magazine. Now, the New Yorker magazine is another magazine run that has some very valuable issues in it. Now, most of them aren't worth a fortune, but some of them, depending on the artist, the cover work, stories and articles inside of it, can be worth a small fortune. Like this one here that sold for almost $1,500. Now, a lot of early issues, the first few issues of any run, were limited in production. As the magazine got more popular, obviously they produced more of them. Now, this is one of those modern day ones. This one's from 2012, and this is the first issue of Bitcoin magazine. This one, they only produced 5,000 bagged copies of it right here. This is an unopened one. It does usually sell in the $1,000 plus range. Even if it's open, you can still get hundreds of dollars for it as well. Now, some magazines do not look like much. Like old issues of Rolling Stone magazine are actually in a newspaper format. This is On Track magazine, and this highlights many of the most popular racing events of the year. This is volume 1. It's $1,300. This one was a limited production run, so not many of them are made, so when it does show up, it usually garners an incredible amount of money. Now, this one's an interesting one. Black Belt magazine. This is issue number 1. Volume 1, Issue 1 from 1961. This is a small startup, so there weren't a ton of them made. I do believe this magazine is still being produced today, if I'm not mistaken. It always sells for hundreds of dollars. Now, some of the local produced ones, club magazines, can go for thousands of dollars as well. This is Teen Angels magazine. This is the lowrider community. These are highly sought after. It goes into all sorts of details. I believe there's imagery in the whole works. The first issue of this can sell for thousands. Any issue of Teen Angels will sell for a ton of money regardless. This is issue number 19, and it's still sold for well over $1,000. Now, here's a magazine run by Marvel, and this is called Foom, and there's quite a few issues of Foom that is worth some good money. Now, this has an appearance by X-Men, which predates X-Men 94. It's in a magazine form. This one is constantly missed. There are many superhero comic-related items that first appeared in magazines. Some of the oddball characters, such as Flaming Carrot, first appeared in some of these fanzine type of magazines. So it's a huge area that's often missed. It does not fit in with comic books, so many times it's just shoved in with magazines when you're out in the wild. Now, here's another fine example. This is a Curtis publication. It's a Marvel, obviously. This is Marvel Preview Presents Star-Lord. This is the first app of Star-Lord, a highly collected character. This one usually sells for $1,000 or better if it's not CGC, but still in high quality. This is a 9.8, around the $3,000 mark for this high-grade copy of Star-Lord's first app. Magazine-sized, comic-related classic. And this is Vampirella. This is the first appearance, first issue by Warner. Highly sought after. This one shows up with issues of Conan and things along that line. This one has a big fan base, including myself. This is one of the issues that I had to have. This one is highly sought after and in decent condition will usually get you close to $1,000 a pop. Now, here's another one of those spectacular finds. This is the Dragon magazine. This is the first issue of the TSR Classic Dragon magazine, a Dungeons & Dragons tie-in. This one usually sells for bare bones minimum at least $1,000. This one has a little bit of issues with it, but it's still sold for $1,650. Now, don't assume that it's just tied to U.S. published magazines. There are many foreign editions of magazines that will carry some phenomenal value. This is a Shonen Jump. This is the first One Piece. This is the first episode in this. It's $1,500 for this copy. Now, this one routinely sells for hundreds of dollars regardless. The condition obviously is important. These were imported in a decent quantity that some of these will still show up here in the U.S. Now, another big line of magazines to always look for is Big Brother magazine. It's a skateboarding magazine. This has big tie-ins to Jackass, the TV show on MTV, Johnny Knoxville, and the whole works. Many of them appeared on the cover or inside the magazine. There weren't a ton of issues made. This was a specialty one. They issued the magazine in a cereal box. I believe it had other items in it as well. It's a comical takeoff on sugar-coated pops. They sell extremely well, especially when they're sealed like this. This one went for $1,500. All of the issues of Big Brother magazine will get you some really good money. Hundreds, if not thousands. Most of the earlier skateboarding and surf magazines of this time frame or before will also sell for some phenomenal money as well. Now, some books were first published in magazines. They weren't available in a book form originally first. Now, some of the hottest ones are tied to Dune by Herbert. Dune was extremely popular even when it was released originally through Analog magazine. This is one that I've talked about many, many times. I've turned these up personally myself. They sell extremely well, even if you do not have the entire run. Just single issues of this one can sell for a few $100s if it's in good condition. The Dune Saga was originally published through multiple issues of Analog magazine. Again, science fiction tied, extremely popular. If you really want the truthful first edition, first pressing of Dune, the story of Dune, you have to get the magazines. Obviously, the book itself is still worth money, but there are other ones just like this where the first edition of a book is technically published in at least one issue, if not multiples, of a magazine just like this. Now, lastly, some of the most popular comic book related characters ever published were first published in magazine format. Now, this is a magazine / pulp. This is from 1928, and this is Amazing Stories. This is the first Buck Rogers. Now, you should know enough to grab up something like this, but it's just an old magazine to many people, just as most of these are. As you see, many of these magazines are not super old to begin with and could still be laying around in a closet, in a drawer somewhere, in the attic, in the basement, in the garage, in a box, put away for the last 20, 30, 40, 50 years. There is, though, major value in magazines, as you can see here. Well, there we have it. Hopefully that gave you some ideas, some thoughts. If you enjoyed this video, please hit that like button down below. You can also hit the bell icon to be notified if I post new content or go live. Subscribe and tell all your friends.
Some suggestions about filing cabinets. Open only one drawer at a time. Unless you enjoy smashing your fingers, never grasp the file around the bottom, side, or top. See what I mean? Now, you may be an architect, but don't build on top of a filing cabinet. Why? Oh, we'll show you why. You remember Miss Diffle. She's going to get that drawer open or else. Now, just a minute, Miss Diffle. Why go through those unladylike gyrations? Here cometh young Lochinvar to solveth all your problems. Now, watch his technique. That's right. Brace the feet, address the handles, pull hard. Well, that's one way. You might also remember that if the heavily loaded drawers had been at the bottom of the file, this would not have happened.